Joe, who are the Bills going to draft?
Hang on a minute. Are we rolling right now?
Yeah, no, I was gonna. It was like very.
Oh,
It was like very. I had like a good tone there. It was kind of like mystic. All right, we'll start
well,
again.
that's why I didn't know if we were in it.
Okay,
There's no way that's right.
take two. Joe, who are the Bills going to draft?
I mean, there are a number of variabilities here. I mean, when they can go so many different ways, but like it's almost like it's not futile because we're going to be sitting here and talking through all the options, obviously,
Yeah.
but there's just so many things that could change the entire scope of what they're looking at with number 30. Like, hey, maybe there's a run on defensive tackles and a guy that maybe they thought was going to be there at 30 just isn't there. Or maybe there's an earlier than expected run on cornerbacks, and maybe there's an edge rusher there that they weren't expecting. Maybe there's a receiver there that they weren't expecting. So like there's just so many different things where it's like, okay, you're formulating all these different things. It's Zach Galifianakis in the GIF with all the different formulas going all around his head. And it's like, okay, well, it's really tough to say who's going to get drafted up until the point in which we're like, I don't know, 7, 8 picks out. And even then might be a little early.
So I'll give you the option. What position do you want to start with? Because I feel like there's a couple positions we can zero in on and say, okay, these are the ones that make the most sense for the Bills if they do stay at 30 or if they stay in the first round. So what position do you want to start with? And then I'll kind of lead the way.
I think the two that probably stand out for 30 above all else right now, based on the way that the draft is kind of trending, is defensive tackle and cornerback. But you know, there are, like I said, variables. So let's just go with defensive tackle because I feel like that's pretty much a hot topic with a lot of fans out there.
Okay, so defensive tackle. When I think of defensive tackle, there's three names I immediately think of when I think of the Bills, at least in the first round. Maybe I'll say four names, but the easy ones are Kenneth Grant, Derek Harmon, Walter Nolan, and then just to be spicy, I'll throw in Tyleik Williams from Ohio State as like kind of the fringe guy. TJ Sanders too, but those are the names that I think immediately come to mind with the Bills. Now, the interesting thing is, though, you do enough mock draft simulations, you read enough people. It feels unlikely, though, that maybe those top three guys are still around at 30. Do you think any of them are worth moving up for? Do you think that's something the Bills would explore?
Yeah, I think if there was a player of the trio that they might consider a minor move up for, to me, Derek Harmon makes the most sense of that group, just because I think you also have to look at what the Bills are trying to get out of the position here. Like a lot of people are going, okay, let's see them get that one technique run stuffing defensive tackle. He can be like 330 pounds. Who the heck cares? But the only reason that I think the Bills would use a first round pick on a player at that position that could be that have that home base at one technique is if they have potential 3 down value. So like the notion of these nose tackle 340 pounders, like sure, that's great, but you got to take them off the field on pass rushing downs, and that's basically a 50% player at their ceiling. So that's why I like Harmon, because I do think he has the versatility to start at one technique and also stay on the field all 3 downs. And he is the most, no doubt about it, guy to do that of that three that we're talking about. So that's why, to me, he's the one that would be kind of worth it, but it depends on what you're giving up. Like, are you giving up one of your seconds? I probably wouldn't do that if it were me. I think the earliest conversation I would be willing to have is if it involves 109, which is their early 4th round pick. And even then it's like, okay, well, that is potentially your gateway to get back in on into round 3. So it's difficult because there's so many different things, but Harmon, I like the most. Nolan, he's more of a 3 technique than a 1 technique, but I can see them pushing him there, but I think he's going to be gone, potentially the first defensive tackle off the board. And then Grant is the big question mark because he's a run stuffer. He's huge. He's built like a brick house, but do they project him as someone who can have down the line pass rushing potential? It seems like he moves well enough to be able to do so, but that question has to be answered by each individual team interested in defensive tackles.
If they wait until day 2, let's say they take a corner first or they take a different position first and they wait until day 2, are there any of the guys that I mentioned or names that I didn't mention who you're like, hey, that makes a lot of sense for the Bills?
So I think Tyleek Williams from Ohio State,
Yeah.
I think that will be. I could see him sliding down to 56 if teams aren't sold on his 3-down capability. And then again, it becomes a Kenneth Grant conversation to where, okay, how much are you projecting this person to be able to um, give you something on third downs when teams are dropping back to pass? That's a big question for a lot of these guys. Like Alfred Collins is another one from Texas where
Yeah.
he's a good run stuffer. Any 3-down value, I just don't know. So if you're talking 56, 62, I could see Tyleek Williams in the conversation there for sure. I mean, heck, if things go completely wrong, I could see him being at 30, but I think they would rather a trade down from that perspective. But 56 and 62, I think you're looking at a bunch of guys who might you might say, okay, are they a 1 technique or are they a 3 technique? But the Bills value that versatility. So I think if they can build it out to where the player can have their home base be at 1 tech and be able to moonlight at 3 because they switch before the snap so often, then I think that could be a path to it. So guys like TJ Sanders, who you brought up, I think could be in this discussion there. Guys like Ty Robinson from Nebraska is another one I've been thinking about. Guys like Joshua Farmer from Florida State. Yeah. That's the type of range, but they also have question marks because, Joshua Farmer wasn't really a super great run defender last year. And that's kind of the job of a 1 technique, even though he's in a bigger package. And then TJ Sanders, his combine weight was under 300. He got to 305 at his pro day. And Ty Robinson is around the 290 mark, 295 mark. And both of those guys have the ability to get bigger. It's just a matter of, do they view that player in that 1 tech role?
How much time, if you had to estimate, do you think you have spent watching cornerback film over the last month?
It's tough because cornerback film, you really have to work at it because a lot of the stuff that's available is just broadcast copy, and your ability to see what's going on down the field is not all that great. So you really have to watch a lot of different stuff. So yeah, I've taken a few days, and I think I might be a little on the short side of that estimation.
So when you take all of that time, you're putting in so much work towards scouting that position. What are the players, or who are the players that you think make the most sense for the Bills? Because it feels like at that position, I really have besides Travis Hunter, I really have no idea what's going to happen with all of the air quote top cornerbacks.
Yeah, I can make a case for basically every cornerback that you see on those top 100 lists in terms of their fit for the Bills, because I don't think that there's necessarily a man coverage only cornerback. I know everyone is scared of drafting another Kaiir Elam, and rightfully so. But I think for the most part, most of the guys that we're talking about have the ability to play zone, or they're at their best when playing in zone as a perimeter cornerback. So even though like guys like Will Johnson and Jahdae Barron, who I think are going to be the second and third cornerbacks off the board, even though those guys have a bit shorter arms than maybe the Bills usually go for, their games are so they're so good that it helps overcome the short arms. Like Will Johnson is just a taller player, so that helps too. He's like 6'2". And he's so quick to react, and his instincts are very good, and that's why you could see that making it work. Is he going to make it to 30? I have my doubts. Jahdae Barron's another one. He's on the shorter side. Some people are wondering if he's a nickel or a safety. I think he could project pretty well into the Bills, to the Bills as a boundary guy, even though he's got short arms and is a bit of a shorter guy. Just his instincts, his play recognition, everything like that, his tackling ability, his closing ability, that all kind of checks out for me to where I think that could be a potential, like, the name I liken it to is like what the Bills thought of Ed Oliver at the 3 technique spot, because he's not a prototype whatsoever. But if the dude can play, the dude can play. That said, don't think Jahdae Barron's going to get there.
So Trey Amos then seems like I talked to Jordan Reed from ESPN. I talked to Field Yates from ESPN, and I asked them both similar questions. I was like, "Who's your favorite fit in this draft for the Bills if they stay at 30?" And they both said Trey Amos. They're like, he's just such a good fit for what the Bills like. So he's a longer corner, speed, just athletic. It feels like he checks kind of all the boxes the Bills want, right?
Yeah, he does. And you talk about prototype and average height, weight, arm length. Like it's pretty much a check across the board for him there. He passed the speed test throughout the pre-draft process, even though that's not super important to the Bills, but it's still just another check in his direction. I think he had 16 pass breakups in his final year at Mississippi, and that is a big thing because teams are trying him, and he's saying, not today. Had 3 picks to go along with it. I think where you might wonder how does this translate is in the fact that he didn't do most of this stuff up until 2024, which was his 5th season, and before that, his first 3 years he spent it at Louisiana, and then in 2023 he was at Alabama and really didn't get on the field behind some really talented players, but didn't get on the field. So that would be the hesitation there. But I like him because he's a fit for zone. He has the ability to play man. He can run. He's got ball skills. He's got instincts, and he's good enough as a tackler. And to me, that's kind of why I think that linking is both logical and a correct sort of line of thinking. But I will say this, is that a player that you have to take at 30? Like, can you push down the board a bit and maybe, have a team trade up and then you see if that player is still available, because he's kind of the top of the next tier of guys to where if you miss out on him, then it's not necessarily the end of the world.
So let's say, for sake of the conversation, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but let's say for the sake of the conversation, there's 3 positions that seem like the most likely options for the Bills in the first round. That would be edge, defensive tackle, and cornerback. Do you agree? Those are the 3 most likely?
Yeah, and I will say the sneaky 4th is wide receiver if the right guy is there.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. What would be the option or the potential position that they could take at 30 that would surprise at least most people?
Yeah, wide receiver is probably that, even if I don't love the year of wide receivers this season, but when you look at a guy like Matthew Golden, I think there's a lot of appeal there. That said, it seems like he's going to be gone before 20, 20 within the first 25 at the latest. And then you have other guys like Emeka Ibuka, who great prospect, mostly a slot receiver that you can kind of move around. And there's just, you're not doing that. Luther Burden, kind of the same deal. You can project him to be a potential outside guy, but you're basically duplicating Curtis Samuel in terms of early returns. And what else is Luther Burden doing for your program? So I think Golden to me has the most high range ability, but that's why I've cooled off on the idea of wide receiver at 30, just because I don't know that there is a right player to Bill's scheme and what they need now and in the next 1 to 2 years past 2025 for what they're looking for.
All right, I'm going to ask you one more wide receiver question. We could go nonstop. Who's your favorite day 2 target at wide receiver?
For them specifically?
Yeah.
I think Jalen Noel is interesting out of Iowa State. He's another one of those guys that maybe he's best in the slot, but I think he could play all 3 spots. I like his ability to get down the field, especially if let's say you have Shakir lined up out wide and you have Noel. He kind of gives you a little bit more speed than Shakir does. So I do like that. I think another one to keep an eye on might be Jalen Royals out of Utah State. Kind of a high ceiling guy more than anything.
A lot of speed too.
Not super polished at this point, but that's the Bills have their top 3 are basically established this year with Palmer, Shakir, and Keon Coleman. So it's not as though you're trying to force that player, so you can give him some time. So that's why I kind of like that fit. And the players I think that they would likely avoid are the taller, slower, go up and get it guys, because they just drafted that last year in Keon Coleman.
Last one. Do you think the Bills draft at 30?
Depends on how the quarterbacks go. If Shador Sanders is at 30, I'm moving out.
They're trading back. Same thing with probably
exactly.
What Jackson Dart is probably in the same conversation.
Mm-hmm. You could make a case for Milroe and Tyler Shuck as well. I mean, these are, and there's a lot of teams between 33 and 40 that could conceivably want to move up. Cleveland at 33, Giants at 34. You got the Raiders at 37. You've got the Saints at 40. Like that's a pretty good contingent, and that's not even counting teams that might want to move up for a different position. So if the quarterbacks fall, and like if Shador Sanders gets past Pittsburgh at 21, then there's an interesting market coming up for those teams in the back half of the first, or really the last 4 or 5 picks of the first round, because that's when it starts to become a bit more doable for the teams that didn't want to use their first pick on a quarterback because they weren't sure about the class, but they have to give up maybe a 3rd round pick or maybe a 4th round pick. They would feel a lot better doing so with that investment.
Hi, Brandon, or hi, Joe Shane. This is Brandon Bean, your best friend on the phone. You want to move up a couple spots and give us a 3rd round pick? Like it feels like
there's a reason. There's a reason why I have been talking about that probably for the last week or so, because it just feels like something that could definitely happen. And if Shador Sanders is on the board at 30, and Joe Shane and Brian Dable have been basically in quarterback purgatory for the last several years, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And the Giants have 2 3rd round picks, so that's part of it.
DJ, who works at our station, does digital. So I was explaining to DJ, I was like, Thursday could be crazy busy, or nothing could happen at all, because we're trying to figure out like when he should be working in the back end. And it's like, well, maybe it's crazy at like 11 when they make a pick, or maybe nothing happens, kind of like last year where everybody was like, hey, 3 picks in the 2nd round would be kind of crazy though.
3 picks in the 2nd round, and potentially
then they would have a 3rd. Then they would probably also get a 3rd, and then maybe
have the ammo to get back into the 3rd if they wanted to.
Yeah, give me like 5 picks on day 2. How fun would that be?
It sounds like you just read my most recent mock draft, Matthew Bove.
So I have one also, but you poured a little bit of cold water because I really feel like Tyleik Williams makes a lot of sense. And then
I do too. I mean, I do too. I wonder if maybe he's just a bit below where you can kind of get someone similar to him in the 2nd round.
Yeah. Also, my like draft crush is Savion Williams from TCU. I have no idea why the Bills, they could utilize him. Like none. It doesn't make any sense, but I just kind of love the idea of somebody who can do everything.
Okay. You could.
There's no reason the Bills would draft him.
You could wait and get a guy similar, well, not like size-wise, but someone who was a college receiver for most of his time in college, and then transitioned to running back, and that was Brashard Smith out of SMU. So there's
future Wheatfield Weeche.
Oh, here we go.
All right, thank you, Joe. Bye, buddy.
Thank you, Matthew.